Hey guys, welcome back to OrmsTV. Today we're out here at the lovely Boschendal and we're bringing you guys a review on the all-new Sony Alpha 1.
I'll be comparing it to the Canon R5, and this is kind of its direct competitor, right?
Yeah, and I mean, we know the R5 is an absolute beast of a camera and both of us really love it. So we figured what better to compare Sony's new beast with? Take it to the R5.
Now first up, as always, we'll run through some quick specs of this model. And special about the A1 is going to be its megapixel. It is 50 megapixels and it's a backside illuminated sensor. So that means great dynamic range and great low light performance. Also on top of that megapixel, you are getting 30 frames per second in electronic mode. And in mechanical shutter mode, you can get up to 10.
Now in terms of the video performance on this unit, you're looking at 8K up to 30 frames per second, 4K running at a maximum of 120 frames per second, and that is at 422 10-bit internal recording. Then this unit also does by now the very familiar Sony's 16-bit RAW output, which at this stage still no external recorders can actually use, but it is very nice to have that future-proofing functionality within this unit. You also have Sony's S-Cinetone on this camera, and then of course you have S-Log 2 and 3 for that beautifully flat profile that Sony has become so well known for.
So jumping to autofocus, we've got 759 phase detect autofocus points. We have 5.5 in-body stabilization. So any lens you put on the camera is going to be stabilized.
Yeah, so from the specs, it really looks like a very capable all-round camera.
Yep.
But we went out today, we shot with this camera literally for the entire day, and we shot it side by side with the R5, as we mentioned. And that's really going to show us how this camera actually performs as an all-round unit. So we're going to take you guys through how we found shooting with it and just our overall impressions of this unit.
Now the first thing is, when you pick up this camera, is it's going to feel quite similar to the A7S III. Now I've got quite sort of small hands, and for me personally there's no issue with the grip. It is quite familiar in terms of where all the buttons is, except for a couple of extra ports. You've got your network port for FTP, you've got your flash sync port for studio work, and quite nice that they've kept the full HDMI port as well. But in overall body handling, I really feel that it is nice personally for me.
Yeah, so I tend to agree with you on most of those things, except the actual grip for me. So I've got slightly bigger hands, and when I hold this unit, I have the pinky slip problem, which I'm not a big fan of. And I keep saying this with every Sony camera that we look at. I wish they could make the body slightly taller and reduce the protrusion of the viewfinder at the top, smooth it out a little bit, and that would give me just enough extra height to have my pinky on the bottom there. Everything else on here is very familiar. So we have our by now well-known Sony dual card slots that can take both the CF Express Type A and SD cards in the single slot. We have the Sony FZ100 series battery over here as well, and that's good for Sony rates it at about 550 shots on this unit. Yeah, saying that as well, we've been shooting with it and it was a mix of stills and video, and right now it's sitting at about 68% battery life left, which is pretty good performance, all facts considered. So I've got no complaints about that. Everything else on here, again, very familiar. We've got the touch screen at the back over here. All the buttons are in pretty decent places. Everything falls quite well to the hands. Personally, I've got no problem with the body other than that grip issue that we've got over here.
And the only way you'll combat that is maybe getting an extended battery life.
Absolutely. In terms of something that is new though on here that I do actually like, is this little selector over here. Now this is something new for Sony, and on here you can choose your focus modes. So in previous units you had to kind of go into the menu to do that, or use the quick function to go through your focus modes, but it's really nice to have it on a selector. And once you get used to it, it's super easy to flick between continuous, single shot, manual focus, whatever you feel like, a nice and organic interface to use over here.
So for the past couple of years, I think we've kind of gotten accustomed to 24 megapixel being enough, and it was enough. But now, shooting with these 50 megapixel monsters, I actually really prefer it. When you start punching into these images, it just really keeps the detail.
Yeah, and I mean, think about a couple of years ago when sort of 50 megapixel cameras first started to appear. Shooting at 40 and 50 megapixels was difficult.
Yes.
It was tricky to get your subject sharp. any sort of movement, anything that went wrong in the shot created fuzziness and really ruined your detail. Nowadays though, it's become so sort of commonplace to be shooting at these massively high resolutions and getting incredibly sharp and crystal clear results out of it, that I really think this is going to become sort of like the standard. In a couple of years from now, we're going to be looking back at these cameras and you're going to look, oh, 50 megapixels. Everything's shooting that. And I think that's a real testament to the technology that both Sony and Canon is able to implement these days. And for that, I really, really applaud it. The quality that we got out of the Alpha 1 today has been phenomenal. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily better than the R5 in terms of image quality, but we already know how good that is. And to see Sony come out with a unit that goes tier to tier with it, literally hit for hit, I think the difference between 48 and 50 megapixels is negligible. And it's kind of just Sony going, yeah, I got this. You know, you're at 48, I got you. And that's perfectly fine. But the quality that you get out of these cameras is truly, truly phenomenal.
Now, as you mentioned, back in the day when we were shooting on 50 megapixel sensors, autofocus was quite a bit of a problem. And I think with mirrorless cameras, they've definitely perfected it. Now, the Sony A1 shoots at 30 frames per second. And when we were shooting Sam on the bike going on the pump track, I hit it on face detection mode and it just kept every single shot sharp. Not one was out of focus.
Yeah, it's really, really incredible to think that you're getting 50 megapixels, 30 times a second with autofocus in between, and it just works.
And it was tracking his face completely.
Yeah, no problem. Locked onto the face, jumps to the eye once it gets close enough, locks on. You don't have problems anymore. It's become so incredibly easy to shoot this type of work. And that's the same thing that we said when we looked at like the R6 and the R5 previously. It's become so incredibly easy to lock onto your subject and shoot and get the results. And it kind of feels like Sony has stepped it up a little bit from their previous autofocus performance, and that you now really have an autofocus system that is very much on par with what Canon delivered in the R6 and specifically the R5. And today I kind of thought that it was going to be very similar to previous Sonys that we've tested, where it's really good, it's just not quite where it's supposed to be. But they've stepped it up really, really nicely with the Alpha 1.
The last thing we want to mention on resolution is going to be the pixel shift mode. Now this guy can shoot 16 different exposures and compile it into a 199 megapixel shot. So this is going to be great for landscape guys or for someone that wants kind of like a medium format, large scale print.
Yeah, on that, just remember that it's very tricky to do it in any scenario where there's movement included. So landscapes are sometimes a little bit tricky, but a lot of people use this when they're shooting still lifes, in studio work, that kind of thing. Really, really phenomenal. We've seen guys pull it off with landscapes, and when they do, it is absolutely phenomenal. But just bear that in mind when you do get into that pixel shift type of shooting.
So now jumping over to video, this guy on paper is going to be very close to the A7S III, except of the big boy, 8K 30 frames.
Yeah, everything else in here is very, very similar to your S3 and now very familiar to Sony users. You've got your beautiful 10-bit 422 4K internal. You got that lovely 120 frames per second that this camera is capable of. You can output your video through your full-size HDMI port. It's a really solid performing camera. The video quality is good. The 8K video, I mean, it's a nice to have. It's really great that you can now shoot at that kind of resolutions, but I don't think it's that big a deal yet. I can't see a lot of people really shooting in 8K right now, but it's very nice to be able to future-proof your setup as it is right now with the Alpha A1. Now, all of that is perfectly good and well. We know that the performance on this unit is good, but when it comes to actually deciding on whether an Alpha 1 is for you, you have to compare it to its biggest competitor, the R5.
And for me personally, when you look at small things like why they not put in a flippy screen on the A1 but they do it on the S3, doesn't really make sense to me. I really love the touchscreen on it. Flipping through the menu is extremely helpful and quick, but why not put a flippy screen in it?
Absolutely. For me, the biggest thing, just right off the bat, is the grip. And I mentioned it when we actually went through the body on this unit. The grip isn't quite there for me. On the R5,
Yeah.
it's perfect.
The other thing was autofocus. As we said, we really love the Canon R5 autofocus, and I feel like today we kind of still do. We still prefer the R5 autofocus.
Yeah, not that there's anything wrong with the autofocus system on the Alpha 1. It is
Still
incredible.
very good, yeah.
It absolutely blows everything else completely out of the water. But there's just something about the way that the R5's autofocus locks on
Yeah.
that I think is just a little bit,
Especially when
better.
it comes to tracking faces.
The R5 still has it beat ever so slightly. And I think that's important. It's something that you need to know if you're considering a camera in this bracket.
Now, without fluffing up the R5 too much, there is some drawbacks. As
Yeah.
we all know that there is some overheating issues with the R5 when you're shooting at roughly about 40 minutes to about an hour, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's still a bit of a problem. In practical terms, it's probably not really an issue because the type of video that you're going to be shooting with these units, you're not really going to place it on a tripod, point in a direction and record for an hour continuously.
It's more clip-based. A couple of minutes here, a couple of seconds here.
But it is very nice that on the Alpha 1, as we've seen in previous Sony models, there is absolutely zero limitation on the length of time that you can record your 4K video. It will keep running indefinitely as long as there is memory space available or space in your external recorder, however it is that you're recording. Now the 8K on this unit also records for an incredible amount of time. On these units, you know, Sony's saying that you're going to be recording up to about an hour and a half before you start to run into any heating issues. And that's quite an improvement over something like the R5, where we're still getting reports of overheating happening at roughly about half an hour, sometimes even less than that if it's a nice hot day outside. And again, I know it's not the end of the world. It really isn't even something that should concern you. But if you're a working professional, having that peace of mind that this thing will not cut out, it will not overheat while you're recording, is a big plus for me.
Now another comparison on the Sony side is going to be frames per second, where the Sony pulls off at 30 frames per second in the electronic mode and the Canon only caps out at about 20. Now personally, I never grew up shooting those kind of frames per second, but it is nice to have that extra bit of peace of mind to know that you'll be capturing that bird, getting that perfect shot.
And in the real world, the difference between 20 and 30 is probably not that big. I mean, 20 is already
amazing fast.
It's a borderline absurd amount. I mean,
Yeah.
a couple of years ago, you know, when your 1DX units and that were shooting like 18 frames per second,
Yeah.
you were already blown away, you know, and now you're running at 30. And as you said, it's just about that extra bit of peace of mind, that extra bit of security. As that bird takes off, as that lion grabs its prey and you're holding down and you're shooting, that extra 10 frames a second could be the difference between getting that winning shot or missing it. Give me more of that. You know, step it up. It's all good and well to go 20 frames a second and all of that, but this is the type of performance that we want to see. And this is the promise that mirrorless cameras had, is that we'll get more speed, more power, more performance, more autofocus capabilities with every iteration. And in that sense, it does feel like Sony really stepped it up.
Yeah.
Took that next leap with this unit, pushing to 30 frames a second. I mean, that's epic.
Amazing. So one area I feel like the Sony A1 should have maybe taken it to the next level was the Ibis. Now this guy does do 5.5 stop stabilization in body, which is great. But comparing it next to the R5, which can do 8 stops, it kind of feels like they should have bumped it up a little bit, right?
Yeah, and this is the same Ibis system that we found in the A7S III. And when we compared the video capabilities of the R5 to that of the S3, that was one of the big letdowns for me, because it was a clear advantage to the Canon in that field. And I really hope that Sony does come in and step that up, because I've been using that same Ibis system for many years now. And while 3 years ago it was industry leading, it's now kind of fallen behind a little
Yeah.
bit. So the question that we've been asking ourselves the entire day now, is it worth going for Sony's new flagship when the R5 exists in the world? And it's not an easy question to answer.
Yeah, it's tricky. There's two answers for me. The one answer is, if you are a Sony shooter with many existing Sony lenses, yeah, no problem. There's nothing wrong with the A1. It is a one-hit wonder. Amazing pro video, amazing pro stills, great for everything. It's not gonna hold you back. But if you're a first-time buyer and you are looking at top-of-the-range performance and you are looking at these two cameras, if it was my money, I would actually really consider the Canon R5.
You know, it kind of pains me to say it, but in this case, I actually 100% agree with you. I really wanted the Alpha 1 to be that next halo camera that comes out and creates the new norm, the new standard, the new benchmark that everybody aspires to and everybody tries to get at. And it's so close. It really, really is incredibly close. And as you say, within Sony's lineup, if you're in the Sony architecture, this thing is such a step from everything else that they do, that it is a no-brainer. You want the best Sony camera, you go out and you buy this. If you're gonna be a professional wedding photographer and portrait photographer and sport photographer and wildlife photographer and content creator and videographer and news gathering and
anything,
absolutely everything in the Sony family, this is the camera you get. Absolutely. You don't think twice about it, you go out and you get this. But for everybody else, the R5 is a better value proposition. And it's so close to the Alpha 1 in a lot of fields, and in some fields better. If I was spending my own money on a camera right now, Canon would get it.
Alright guys, that is our review on the Sony Alpha 1. We really hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to hit the like button and let us know in the comments below what you think.
Yeah, and guys, as always, if you enjoy the content that we're putting out, please consider subscribing to our channel. It really helps us out a lot and enables us to make the type of videos that you guys enjoy. So until next time, guys, cheers.
Cheers.